Welcome to the Social Justice Forums. I'm your host, Alleyne, covering for Darren Jaime. We thank you for joining us. If you are asking the question, what is this show all about? We bring you a forum discussion providing a deeper understanding of the issues and inequities many communities face. From systemic inequalities to pressing social problems, our guests will provide multiple perspectives and insights to help us better understand and address these challenges. We invite you to stay connected with us as the Social Justice Forum starts now. Welcome back. Founded in 1959, SSP International has been offering high school students an inspiring hands-on immersion in experimental science. With flagship programs like fields like astrophysics, biochemistry, genomics, and synthetic chemistry, SSP provides exceptional teens with the opportunity to engage in real research, work closely with mentors, and join a supportive community that extends far beyond their time in the program. Joining us to tell us more is the Director of Astrophysics of SSP International, Nico Adams. Nico, thank you so much for joining me.
Hi, it's great to be here.
Now, can you explain or go into further detail about the mission and vision of SSP International and how it has evolved since its founding in 1959?
Yeah, as you can imagine, 65 years is a long time for a program like this to exist. So I'll kind of start with the through line that's been true the entire time and will be true into the future. SSP, Summer Science Program, is a chance for teenagers, specifically rising seniors in high school, to get a chance to do real research that's well beyond what you'd normally see at the high school level. It's sort of a first taste of what science is beyond sitting in a classroom and learning in that sort of traditional way. Science, as you get out into the world, is a much more active thing that involves a lot more creativity. So it's a chance for people to dip their toes into that and get a feel for what that's like. As you can imagine, 1959, very different time than today. SSP actually launched when Sputnik launched. So it started in a sort of Cold War context to get people involved in astrophysics, to stay competitive on the national stage. I think that's a lot less true these days. SSP is much more focused on building a community of people and not just getting people into science, but making sure that no matter what you want to do, you have the tools and community and support that you need to do it. A lot of our alumni go into science, many of them don't. Many just do completely unrelated things, but I think everyone gets a lot out of their time that they spent with this program.
Now, what makes the program a leading educational experience for high school students?
Well, quite a few things. One thing I like to describe about it is that it is project first. So if you are a science student in high school right now, probably your experience of science, like I said earlier, is sitting in a classroom and learning. And that is the opposite of the way that SSP is designed. SSP plops you onto a campus with 36 people. They are from all around the country and all around the world, and from lots of different backgrounds. You are grouped with two other participants, and over the course of 5 weeks, your goal is to complete the science project, which is an authentic project that is contributing to the field that it is involved in. So in astrophysics, that project is called the Orbit Determination Project. You are taking observations with a real telescope that you are using, and you are basically trying to figure out for a target near Earth asteroid, what is that asteroid's orbit? And can you predict where it's going to be in the future? And you actually submit that data to the Minor Planet Center, which is the official body that keeps track of those sorts of observations. So, over the course of 5 weeks, you have to figure out everything that you need to know in order to complete a project like that. And you are contributing to the real scientific field in doing so. I think a lot of things that people feel unconfident about or feel like would be impossible kind of fall away in the face of something that is that lofty a goal, because that's the sort of thing that I didn't get to do until graduate school, until I was after college, actually. So it's very special as a program because it challenges people to do so far beyond, I think, what they expect to be able to do when they come in.
Now, what I think is super amazing and just even fun to hear is that regardless of wherever the children end up, they get a chance to kind of experience something really cool and take part of something that's kind of bigger than them and the program in general. Can you explain how do you, help students that are probably 17 years old, the teenagers, kind of be very engaged in this type of programming?
Yeah, for those who are less than 17, just know that everybody above the age of 17, 18 has a memory of leaving home for the first time. It is scary and it gets easier, but it is very hard. I think one of the hardest challenges for this program is I've talked about the academics. I don't think that's the hardest part about it. I think the part that I would have struggled with at this age is actually just being away from home for 5 weeks with a group of strangers and trying to figure out my place in that. So a big goal of this program is it's designed from the ground up, not just to build sort of academic skill and academic confidence, but also to build community, social skills, and basically a sense of support that you need to make it in the world beyond. So we are giving people their first taste of living in a dorm on a college campus. We run on college campuses all over the country, and you're living in the actual dorms that college students would live in. And there are a lot of events and sort of structures that exist that don't typically exist in college, but that are very helpful for making that leap. So instead of sort of just dropping you into this program, the goal is to form a really cohesive community. We ask everyone to require everyone to go to dinner together at the same time, and we have a seating chart that changes every few days so that everybody gets a chance to meet everybody. We have a lot of support on campus. So we have a set of TAs and a site director that are always there who live, the TAs live in the dorm with students, and they are sort of close in age to the students. Many of them are sort of late in their college process, so they can not only guide students or participants through the process of the project that they're doing, but also the process of living in a dorm on a college campus and away from home. So we build this basically around the idea that you are not just doing academics, you are also trying to get to know each other.
And kind of expanding on that, can you talk about how maybe being a part of the program can teach students about, the importance of teamwork and collaboration, just working with other people?
Yeah, but one of my favorite stories is one of the people who has been in the program for involved at this program for a very long time. Basically, came in when I came into the to this job. She was walking me through what her experience was like back in the '90s, and she every single week was completely dumbfounded by what she was given to accomplish that week. There are problem sets and there are aspects of the project that you have to complete week by week. Every single Sunday, she would see them and she would say, I have no idea how to do this. And then every single Thursday, she would somehow have completed it. It's something that you do as part of this program because the people you're working with are pulling each other across the finish line. So you are contributing what you can, and the people you work with are contributing what they can. It's too hard for any one person to complete on their own, but it is very possible as long as you're able to sort of work together.
Now,
That's just a sort of taste of what it's like.
now, how does SSP ensure that its programs are inclusive and accessible to students from diverse backgrounds?
Yeah, I think there are two steps to this, and one of them is just to make sure that the programs themselves are uh, accessible at all, meaning that you can apply, you can get accepted, and you will be able to go. That is not enough on its own. So we have steps beyond that. But in order to just accomplish that, we are working very, very hard to include students who otherwise have not had access to programs like this. So one of the steps that we're taking is we're reaching out to community-based organizations, which are basically organizations that connect promising students in communities that often don't have access to sort of college admissions and help in that process with admissions committees, typically college admissions committees, but also admissions committees for things like SSP. And aside from that, we are a completely need blind organization when it comes to applications, which means that if you apply and you need financial aid to complete the program, that is invisible to the person who is reviewing your application. They have no knowledge about what your needs are. They only see how promising you are as a student. What we're looking for in students is not the person who has necessarily already completed most of the program and would be basically arriving ready to complete it. We're looking for people who have kind of maxed out what they're able to do in their high school environment and show us that they'll be enthusiastic to learn more. So if that's you, I very strongly encourage you to apply. We will do what we can to make sure that you're able to join us, regardless of the financial need. And aside from that, once people are on campus, we have a lot of community building activities to make sure that the typical ways that people tend to silo off from each other, either due to stratification economically, socially, being from different backgrounds, we try and make sure that those boundaries are broken down, and we try and make sure that people are talking across those lines. And one thing that we do is if you are a student who is on full financial aid, you also receive a stipend that helps you have some spending money that gets you through the process of going through this program where maybe some of the people that you're going through it with have income from parents or people who are supporting them from home. And at the same time, there are many people who have to work over the summer, and that prevents them from being part of this program. We are piloting for a small number of participants a lost wages stipend that is much more significant than the typical stipend, and that basically works as if you make the case to SSP that you would have to work over the summer and that you would lose that income by joining this program, we will do our best to cover the income that you would have lost, partially or fully, with that stipend. So those are all of the sort of quantitative things. We also just have a really strong culture of every person who comes in is valuable, has things to contribute, and should be taken seriously. So we do a lot. It's something that we're working very, very hard on.
And with that, how can, just kind of, I don't want to say prioritizing, but ensuring that, these students feel seen, how can that also, just prepare students within the program to develop intellectually, for, college experiences or just, their experiences with the world?
Yeah, one thing I really wish I had known much earlier on in my education is that I think a big part, and not just me, I think this is becoming more and more established, sort of scientifically. One of the most important aspects to succeeding in college, in careers, in any field that you want to go into, it's not your technical skills. Uh, those are important, but as important often is your sense of belonging in the field, and that's a much more abstract thing. So entering a program like this that tries to be very inclusive, to give you a sense of confidence, and to give you a community that can really increase someone's sense of belonging. Uh, when you go into college, I think that's the thing that we hope will stick with these participants, is that we want them to feel like whatever field they go into, they belong in it, they can feel confident in what they're doing, and they know how to sort of navigate socially. And I think those things make as big a difference often as any set of technical skills that people are taking away from this program.
Now, can you tell me a little bit more about the role that faculty members play in guiding or mentoring students as they, complete their research projects and as they foster collaboration with other students?
Yeah, uh, faculty members are typically we have 3 academic directors on each campus, and that's a fancy word that basically says this is a person who during the year is a university professor in the field that this project is in. So they are the expert on this subject. Their role is not just an academic one; they are the experts on the project. So they're the ones who are sort of taking on the project, making sure that it is completable, making sure that any hiccups that people run into are able to be avoided, and they're helping people learn what they need to in order to accomplish what they need to do. Uh, but on top of that, they're also helping to build community. So we look for not just very accomplished academics, but also very accomplished community builders. Some of the people that we work with every summer and that we hire as faculty are not just skilled teachers in the classroom, but also really skilled at mentoring people and just having fun conversations around the dining room table every night. A lot of people love bringing people into their hobbies. There are some instructors who take people on nature hikes every year, just to their sort of favorite place around campus. And that's one of our favorite things to see. I think that's incredibly valuable at a program like this.
Now, can you tell me more about the alumni network and how it continues to support current participants?
Mm-hmm. So I think there are 2 big examples that I'll name. SSP is basically run by its alumni. It is an incredibly powerful network, and we have 65 years worth of people who have come out of this program who still relate to the program as it exists today. I think that's one of the coolest things, is seeing someone who graduated from this thing in the 1970s and then comes to speak to a participant who graduated in the 2020s, and they both just start geeking out over the same things. It's really wonderful to see, and it's happened a lot. I think that the 2 big events that I have witnessed are, one of them is just called the annual gathering, and this is where everyone who has ever been a part of SSP, either as a participant or a faculty member or a TA, can come together in one city, and they just sort of socialize. It's just a big social event with things are happening throughout the city throughout the week and the weekend, and there's one big sort of dinner and gala where everybody can meet everybody else. So that helps you keep connected with this enormous community across generations and across immense spans of space and time. So that's one. It's just a yearly event, but we have many things like that sort of interspersed throughout the year. And I think the other big effort that we're working on is called SSP Connect. And this is where people who have recently gone through this program, so either very new college students or late high school students, are helping people who are coming in or are just graduating themselves from SSP. And the goal there is to make sure that you have the support that you need as an SSP participant, not just to complete the program, but to start the next stage of your life, which for most people is college or is gaining independence, moving away from home. It's a scary time. So it's, I think, a time that everybody needs a little bit of support, and SSP Connect is a way that people from this program in the past can help new people through it.
Now, oh, I'm sorry. You can continue.
No, that's all I have.
So you briefly mentioned like kind of how this experience is multi-generational and how alumni, are people who have done it before and they're able to help other people who are now in the program. So with that, I'm curious to know, how have you seen the projects change over time? Just because, as we know, science is ever changing, and what it was 50 years ago is different from what it is now. So I'm curious to know from your perspective, how have you seen the program evolve or the projects evolve?
That's a fantastic question, because it's hard to keep this going for 65 years without changes like that. So the biggest thing is that we've added lab sciences. It used to just be an astrophysics program, and we've added 3 new fields, and we're adding more as we speak. One of them is called biochemistry. Another is called genomics. In biochemistry, you are characterizing a protein that is made by a living organism. In genomics, you are raising a bacterial colony and then injecting usually antibiotics, or really stressors, as we call them, that just make it harder for the bacterium to grow. So that colony needs to adapt and change its genetic code in order to make it able to multiply. So by the end of the program, you have created a new organism, and you need to study that organism's genetics to see how it's changed. And then synthetic chemistry is our newest one that we are still sort of in the pilot phase of. So we're in year 2 of running that, and it is the one that I know least about, so I probably shouldn't jump into that without more information. But it basically puts you in the lab, and it is designed by a synthetic chemist. And based on his research, you are doing basically the same things that a professional synthetic chemist does. Astrophysics has had to adapt because that is our longest running program, and it is different but similar, I should say. This is the one that I have the most information on, so I'm sorting through it. But we used to work off of enormous photographic plates, and now we work off of cameras that are digital. So that's just one of the ways that it's changed. We are still characterizing asteroid orbits, and we do it in actually a very similar way, because our instrumentation has gotten more precise, and our ability to observe and to characterize those orbits have gotten better. So participants can actually still contribute in a very real way to our knowledge of the sort of asteroids around the Earth. The project is basically the same. It's the same sorts of observations, and it's the same sorts of characterization. So the fact that we picked something so early on that has stayed part of the scientific world for so long is very lucky, I should say. But we are considering new astrophysics programs as well that bring in some more modern techniques and some more modern questions.
Now, kind of piggybacking off of that a little bit, I'm curious to know, can university locations also impact the type of research projects that students take on?
A little bit. This certainly, we have some limits where lab sciences are both very simple and very complicated. Simple because many universities have labs that are designed to be biochemistry labs or genomics or microbiology labs. So there are a lot of places that we can run those sorts of programs, but they need very specialized equipment in order to make it happen. So we always like to make sure that these projects can be accomplished and that universities have the support that they need. And that can be a bit of an effort. With astrophysics, we're kind of limited by the on-campus telescope. So there are some telescopes that are getting older, or that are on the smaller side, or that just are not well taken care of. And that limits sort of what we can do or where we can operate with astrophysics. We're looking at ways to make sure that we can operate as many places as possible, I should say, because our goal is basically not to operate necessarily at the biggest, most prestigious universities that are the best equipped, but to make sure that we are where the participants are, and that we're covering as much of the United States as possible.
Now, just hearing this from my perspective, I'm like, whoa, this could feel very intimidating, but I'm curious to know, how are the students handling taking on these research projects? And if there are any, what are some challenges they may face, and how do they overcome them?
I am continually shocked at how well people of this age are able to take this stuff on. So I think the biggest surprise for me was when I went onto campus this last summer and witnessed one of these programs for the first time, since I had just started this job. these participants were better at attending lectures than I was. They had learned, I think, over the course of the program, really great advice from their advisors, from the faculty, and from each other, which is where a lot of the learning happens. So it's not as big a challenge as it seems at first because you are not doing this alone. If you were to go into this situation by yourself and have to work out everything, I think it would be impossible for anyone to complete a program like this. But you have a really wonderful team to pull you across the finish line. In terms of challenges, I think the hardest part tends to be the social and emotional aspect of just being away from home and being in a new group of people. We do support people through that, and we have a lot of, I don't want to say monitoring, but we keep an eye on people. We make sure that if somebody appears that they're struggling, that we connect them with the resources they need to get through it. We have, like I said, TAs who live in the dorms with participants and make sure that if there are any conflicts or any sort of difficulties that people are going through, they at least have someone sort of close in age to them and who is very invested in their growth as a person to talk to. Uh, so that's a real concern, and I think it's the biggest concern.
I would also add that I think it's really cool that not everybody is going to have that quintessential college experience of like being in a dorm. And I think this gives some kids the opportunity to kind of have that feel. I know I'm definitely like, oh, I always wish I had the experience of like being in a dorm and getting to know new people. So I think it's amazing that people are able, students are able to kind of have this experience in a very supportive environment. Just because I know with college, you're kind of on your own. So this is kind of like a nice little introduction, I would say, to independence. With that, can you say, is that something that you've seen as well?
That's absolutely something we see. Being in a dorm is really exciting the first time you do it. It does, as any college student will tell you, it gets a little bit tired after a while. It's a big challenge, and it's a big, exciting challenge. And I think something that a lot of people miss after they leave college because there's such a sense of community when you're living that close to so many people in similar circumstances to you. Uh, so I think the biggest thing that we're looking to do is support people who are not just experiencing college for the first time, but who might be first generation students or low income students or people who might not already be on the college path or know a lot of people who are on that path. I think for those people it is harder but still very possible to make that leap. So that's the kind of person we're trying to support right now. If you listening to this are in that situation as a student, do not worry. That's what this program is about. It's a scary leap for anyone, and we're here to support you through it.
Now, I'm just curious, can you tell me a little bit more about SSP's just approach to teaching and learning and how it may differ from what students may see in a high school science class?
Absolutely. I think the biggest difference is that we do give some things that look like a high school science class throughout the program. Many of our projects give out weekly problem sets or things to work on that are similar to what you'd see for homework. We do not give grades, and that's a big difference already. Is that when you're doing something for your own learning and in order to accomplish a larger goal instead of for a grade, I think the whole relationship with learning changes. You can afford to be a lot more creative, take a lot more risks, and just sort of feel a love for the subject that is often taken away when there's someone with a red pen behind the scenes. Kind of maybe a red pen is a dated reference now because I know everything happens online, but with a metaphorical red pen, kind of crossing things off as you go, it's much harder to develop a positive relationship with a subject. So there's that aspect to begin with, but I think there's also the aspect that there's when things are project based like they are with SSP instead of problem based or test based, you get to be really creative and you have to be really creative. There are times when you open the telescope in astrophysics or you walk into the lab in our lab sciences and something goes wrong and you need to figure out what that is. There's no instruction manual, and your goal is just okay, you're off road. Who do you go to? What can you do? What steps should you take? All of that is up to you as a participant. You're developing the tools to answer those sorts of questions on the fly, but it is up to you how you answer them. And I think it one important aspect of science that often gets lost in high school and in sort of early science classes is that it is not uh, it is not a memorization based endeavor. Science is really creative. You can really play in the space once you have the tools to do so and once you have a goal. So for many students, I think this is their first chance to do that.
Now, lastly, I just want to know, where do you see SSP in the next decade? And, how do you plan to continue evolving to meet the needs of future students?
Yeah, we're growing in basically every direction right now. We had a very generous gift from one of our alumni a few years ago of on the order of $200 million. And what that means is that SSP, which was a relatively lower budget organization than that before that, has gone from about 2 programs a year to about 15 this year. Uh, so that's just the traditional summer science program as it's run in the past. That is growing, and we're making sure that it's accessible to as many people as possible. So that mission is going to continue. We'll keep expanding, and we'll keep making this more accessible and easier to access for people who don't typically get to be involved in these sorts of programs. We're also growing internationally. So we've stayed in the United States historically, and hopefully this summer, this is not yet confirmed, but we have high hopes that we'll be able to run a program not within the United States, and that will continue as the years go on. We're also really hoping to expand to different age groups. So certainly one big transition that people go through is around the time they're getting ready to leave high school and start gaining some independence in college or otherwise. Uh, that's a big time. And that's the time that SSP wants to be there for people and give them support and give them opportunities. Another really big time is just at the beginning of high school. I think everybody who has been through that time remembers, like, oh, this is when I developed a really strong interest or a really big part of my identity in one thing or another. And we want to give people the opportunity at that age as well to get some authentic scientific experiences. So we want to run different types of programs for different areas of student, basically.
Well, Nico, thank you so much for joining us. Can you quickly let everyone know where they can go to learn more information?
Yes, the central repository for all of this is summerscience.org. That's summer science and then .org. I hear ads repeat that all the time, so I just am repeating it again so people will remember. I believe that is where you will find everything you need, including information about what this program is, how it works, and importantly, where to apply. Applications are open for international students for just a couple more days. They will close on the 24th of January. So that window is closing, but domestic students, you have a month. So if this was not on your radar and it sounds interesting to you, you should visit that website, summerscience.org, and look up some information about how to apply.
Well, once again, thank you so much for joining us. This was a very interesting conversation.
Thank you so much. This was fantastic.
We have to take a quick break. We'll be back right after this.
Hey, creative family, my name is Timothy Coleman, and I'm the Director of Education here at BronxNet. And I'm standing in BronxNet's Media and Technology Studios in the South Bronx, because I want to let you know about an amazing program that we're bringing back that highlights the creativity of community members just like you. Emerging Media Makers is a show that introduces you to BronxNet certified producers. They've taken a step in their creative journey by enrolling in BronxNet's media training classes. On this show, you'll get to see the many ways that our certified producers have created a space that's all their own. Emerging Media Makers, your passion lives here.
Welcome back. The way schools address race affects students' perceptions of identity and can reinforce existing inequities. This exploration challenges us to rethink how Latinx students are racialized and calls for a more deliberate approach to teaching about race in the classroom. Our next guest is a researcher investigating the impact of bilingual education in this context and promoting a more cohesive and reflective strategy for teaching about race. Joining us is the Assistant Professor of the Department of Chicano and Central American Studies and Education at UCLA, Laura Chávez-Moreno. Laura, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you. I'm very excited to be with you.
Now, I think we're about to have a very important discussion, especially considering everything that we're kind of going through just in the social landscape. But first, can you just tell me a little bit more, when we talk about race in schools, how do schools implicitly and explicitly influence students' understanding of race?
Thank you so much. One of the things that I show in the book is that schools, even if it's not intentional, they teach about ideas about race and what are the racialized groups in our society. And in that way, they sometimes challenge these ideas, but oftentimes they reinforce the societal ideas that are already in our society. One of the assumptions the book has is that our society is racialized and that schools are an important institution in our society, and they help our society, to its detriment, maintain ideas about race and how different resources should be distributed to racialized groups.
Now, what does it mean for schools to foster or hinder critical racial consciousness in students?
Sure. So what I talk about in the book is that we have to have some discussion and planning and purposeful curriculum in terms of being able to advance a student's thinking about race and racism throughout their school years. So the book, How Schools Make Race, Teaching Latinx Racialization in America, examines a bilingual education program in the secondary level. And what I've now noticed is that even though these were middle school and high school students who were in a bilingual program since elementary school, they were still getting lessons about race and racism that were taught in elementary school. So what are those lessons like? For example, they were about being nice to others, even though they look differently than you, which is obviously very good to teach students, especially if they're in elementary. But by the time that lesson kept appearing in high school, students were very bored of it. And some of the lessons that they did hear about, for example, racial histories, they kept hearing over and over again. So they did need some type of progression in what they were learning about race and what is the concept of race itself. So that's what I mean about the development of their critical racial consciousness.
And kind of expanding on that a little bit, especially when we talk about Latinx in America and what that means, can you talk about how just discussions about race could also impact somebody who may be learning about their own race or in their own culture for the first time in the classroom?
Sure, thank you. So one of the things that I do want to start off with before answering your question is about the X in the Latinx. So I use the X to challenge patriarchy and to challenge gender binaries, but to also remind us that the Latin or the Latinx Latino is actually a racial group in the US, and it is different from Latin American. So it is different from Latin American, and I also use the X to remind us to problematize just the word Latin, because it's still a European imposed colonial word to name the people in this space. So in terms of your question about like understanding identity in this group, I do want to share that the book is really not focused on individual identity of students or their teachers. I'm more looking at how society constructs the idea that there is a Latinx group. And I do that through the case study of a bilingual education program, a program that taught Spanish and English. And this program was a racially diverse program. And I looked at how the people talked about the different racialized groups and then compared, for example, Latinidad to, and put Latinidad in relation to Asianness, Blackness, indigeneity, and whiteness. And it wasn't just people talking about it. It was also the practice of distributing resources differently to the different racialized groups that, again, reinforce the idea that these racialized groups exist and that there's this racial hierarchy, that some groups are more deserving than others of certain resources.
Now, in what ways can schools unintentionally contribute to racial inequities despite their commitment to anti-racism? And I think it's very important to highlight that now, just considering, as you mentioned, sometimes in schools, people will talk about, treating others how they want to be treated. And so we'll have these ideas, but sometimes that's not always practiced. So can you just talk about how schools can, again, unintentionally contribute to racial inequity?
Yes, thank you. So one of the things that I found is that by not disclosing or by not highlighting the way that race is made, how we think about race in terms of what creates these racialized groups in our society, that creates some confusion in students about what is race and why racism exists and why these inequalities exist in our society. So one of the ways that I talk about in the book in terms of schools unintentionally reinforcing ideas about race is through not being explicit about the process of creating race in our society. A lot of the times the teachings or the lessons were about how schools, oh, excuse me. A lot of the times the lessons or the teachings were about how schools, sorry, were about how the racial categories were already just natural categories, that they were just categories that existed in our society instead of categories that our society creates and constructs.
Now, how do Spanish English bilingual programs engage in race making work, and what impact does this have on students' racial identities?
Sure. So again, just to emphasize it, the book didn't examine the individual racial identities of students. I look at more like the group identity, or like not even the group identity. I look at more like what people, how the program constructed the boundaries around what is the Latinx group. So it's interesting because I look at how, for example, people talked about the Latinx group as different from, for example, other racialized groups, and that happens in just racialization or racial discourse for any racialized group. But it's interesting because there's some discussion about whether the Latinx group is an ethnicity or race at all, like which one of them is that. And some of the contradictions that I noticed in the book had to really spoke to that. And in the end, I did conclude that the Latinx group is a racialized group, not just an ethnicity. So I could also explore a little bit about that if you'd like.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I would love if you could explore that, because I know growing up in New York City, that was always something that a lot of people weren't really sure about. Even just growing up in New York, sometimes people will refer to themselves as Spanish and not understanding why maybe that's not the term that we should be using. So I'm curious, can you just explain a little bit more about, what you mentioned and what you've learned in that research?
Yeah, thank you. And I taught in the Philadelphia Public School District in Pennsylvania, and my students also said like, "Oh, you're Spanish." Like for example, being Mexican American, that was actually Spanish. So it's interesting that, like you mentioned in New York, I would also hear that when I was a teacher in Philadelphia. Now, to answer your question, what I think is useful, at least in my work, I think it's useful to differentiate ethnicity and race, because in our society, there's lots of different ideas about how we categorize people. So instead of having less words, so for example, just having like race and ethnicity be kind of the same idea, I do like to have two different ideas. So ethnicity for me points to, for example, similar cultural practices that a group may have. And race to me and I draw this in the book, is something that is imposed on a group and and actually disregards whether they actually share any cultural practices or not. So that's how racial groups are made. They're made by just lumping people into this category, disregarding whether they have shared cultural practices or not. So in the classroom, what that looked like, for example, the teachers in the dual language program taught about Latinx as a group that had um, a similar culture. I asked, for example, teachers or students like, "Oh, what is the Latinx group?" And people mentioned like, "Oh, they have a shared culture, they have family values, they have a shared language, etc." But then when I asked like specifically what were the specific like shared practices, then it was like vague, like I mentioned. Oh well, they value family, so it's not really anything very particular. Like, and then also in the teachings, what you notice the teachers doing is that instead of just sharing a Latinx culture, like a shared Latinx culture, they actually talked about the differences within the different groups that are under Latinx. So, for example, how's Dominican Spanish different from, for example, Mexican American Spanish? So they talked about these. So it's interesting that they said, they have shared culture and shared language, etc. But they really focused on making sure that the students knew about the differences within the group. And when I talk about race, I see race as a concept in order for people to be given different resources. So it's really about the different resources that's creating this group.
Now, I want to take a moment to discuss just things that I've heard, especially since we're having this conversation right now, which once again, I want to say thank you for joining us. This is a very important discussion to have. And I think it's something that so many people, regardless of their background and, where they went to school, are continuously learning about race and just, what it means to be, XYZ in America. But I noticed that a lot of people from the Latinx community may have some pushback towards the term or may, feel like they don't identify with the term. Can you explain, what, if you have seen that yourself and, what you may say to somebody who may not understand why this is something that they could possibly identify with?
Yeah, sure. And you don't mean just the X, right? You're saying just the Latinx term, like instead of, for example, being Mexican American or Guatemalan, like being labeled Latino or Latinx. Is that
Yeah,
what
I
you're
would
saying?
love to
Yeah,
explore that.
great.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. That's so important. Thank you so much for asking that. And one of the things that is interesting is that race, because of what it does, that it basically stereotypes, essentializes in terms of like, oh, there's this category here, this group, and this is how it behaves. This is the music they like. This is how they dress. This is how they talk. This is the food, et cetera, et cetera. So we can keep going on and on about how our society assigns different things or characteristics to certain groups. And this is why people may have pushback in terms of like, wait a minute, I don't identify as this because I don't really listen to this type of music, or that's not how I talk, or et cetera, et cetera. And people who are immigrants, for example, from Latin America, all of a sudden they're imposed this identity in terms of like, all of a sudden, instead of being, for example, Colombian, now they are Latinx or Latino or Latina. So it is racial categories are meant to be exclusive in terms of exclusionary, and they are meant to essentialize. And people don't like to feel as if they're being imposed something, right? Now, it's interesting because race puts us in this kind of where like you're in a bad position or you're in a worse position. So in order to fight against racism, you do have to unite against other people who have a shared struggle. And in that uniting, then you also reinforce the idea that there is this Latinx group, for example. So both in the practice of these groups being discriminated against and being stereotyped, and then in the counter or in the challenge of groups then realizing, oh, we have to unite in order to fight this, those two practices actually contribute to reinforcing the different racialized groups.
Now, how can educators encourage students to rethink and reconceptualize race in the context of education? And I also want to add, I know that can be a pretty big order considering a lot of adults are still struggling to, maybe kind of understand and rethink their ideas about race. But how can we do this in schools with people who are much younger?
Yes, thank you. So educators, I believe one thing is to hopefully read the book. The book, I think, provides a lot of different examples of educators doing this difficult work. And so it shows examples where teachers are really engaged and trying to do this. And I think in reading things like that, excuse me, educators can see also that when they're doing this, there will be times where it's not what they would have liked. Some of the teachers felt that they were not really being very successful, that they weren't trained to do that kind of work. And one of the things that I argue in the book is that whether or not you think you're going to teach about race or not, or whether or not you attempt to, because teachers are institutional agents, because they work in schools, they are engaged in um, teaching about racial ideas, whether explicit or not. So might as well do it in a way that's purposeful and intentional and in collaboration and learning with others. So definitely teachers should connect with other teachers and other educators and organizations who are interested in supporting teachers in doing this work. And now that I've said that, it's also very important for communities to support teachers in this difficult work, especially because, like you mentioned in the very beginning, teachers are being attacked because of doing this work. So there has to be support from the community. That means the parents, and then also the school leadership.
I also want to discuss possibly the importance of representation, because I know growing up for me, I didn't have a lot of teachers who looked like me, so maybe having these discussions felt uncomfortable for them. Now I understand that you kind of alluded to the fact that they may have a responsibility to kind of educate themselves, when it comes to these type of topics, but can you explain the importance of kind of having students be around teachers or leaders in the school that may share a background or share the similar challenges with the students?
Yes, thank you. You're right that the race of teachers really matters, and the experiences of teachers really matters in the classroom. So for students to see that a teacher has had the type of experiences that they have, this is really important. Now, having said that, that's not really the only important thing. So for example, in my study, some of the teachers that were the most committed to teaching about race were white teachers. That is also because there was an overrepresentation of white teachers in the program. So I also don't want to say that the white teachers were just doing this work. That's not really accurate for this type of study. But my point is that all of us need to be able to all teachers should be able to do this. It's not just teachers who identify, for example, as Latinx. So it is very important, but more important is the political clarity and the political commitment that the teachers have, and being able to learn with students and follow students' questions.
Now, what strategies can be used to prepare students to critically interrogate racist ideas and challenge systemic inequalities that happen in the classroom and beyond?
Yeah, thank you. One of the great ways that I think teachers can do this is by following students' questions. And because if they're asking the question, then they're ready for the answer. Another thing is to, for example, engage in understanding how their local community is understanding ideas about race and ethnicity, for example, and racism in their community. That's something that teachers could ask students to, like, interview people, like, okay, what do you think about this, etc. And then students could come together and share some of their findings. I think that would be an interesting way for them to understand that people have different ideas about what are these topics, and then perhaps that could spark some interest, curiosity, or opportunities in order for them to then learn about and read how other people or other communities or other scholars even are thinking about these ideas.
Now, I also want to take a moment once again to mention, as you mentioned in the beginning of the interview, I said how a lot of these ideas are kind of under attack. And it seems like progress that we made to discuss race in the classroom is kind of being reversed, and people don't want that to happen. Can you just explain, the impact that could have on future generations of children if we do kind of, as a country, make an effort to remove discussions about race in the classroom?
Yes, it's definitely a situation that I'm seeing also. Thank you so much for asking. It's so important for us to remember that this type of backlash against, for example, a progressive social agenda has happened in history throughout the U.S. When there is some advances, there's also the pushback from conservatives and right wing forces. And plainly racist forces. So we do have to maintain organized, maintain committed to um, ending racial injustice. So it's not just thinking about one's own group. It's also understanding that racism affects other racialized groups. It's not just one particular group. So, for example, for the Latinx group, I think it's very important to understand that there are different racisms within the group, and they don't just suffer from racism from, for example, whiteness. So it is something that we have to think about and make sure to stay organized and to remember that this could have been predicted in terms of like this backlash. It is something that has happened in history in the U.S. before.
And how do we help guide young students to kind of have these very challenging discussions about race? Just because I know that some people fear that maybe this is too heavy for children to discuss. I also want to add that it's not only for a child of color to learn this, but this is something that everybody should learn. So can you talk a little bit more about the importance of introducing these topics to young children?
Yes, thank you so much. That's so important. It is true that these topics need to be introduced at a very young age in school, not just in high school like I studied. So I studied middle school and high school, and that's also where most of my experience is in teaching, even though now I teach at the University of California in Los Angeles, and my students are adults. But it is still important for us to think about how, in the young ages, we should talk about injustice and race. There's a lot of research that talks about that and shows how to do that effectively. There's a lot of resources for teachers in order for them to do that. What I found in the book is that at the secondary level, those resources were not available in Spanish. So for teachers who were interested in teaching about these topics to their students while they were teaching in Spanish, for example, in this dual language program, the social studies component or the Spanish language component, those courses, they didn't really have the resources in order for them to do that. So what the teachers had to do was either use the materials in English or translate them, or use, for example, materials from Latin America, which is problematic because in Latin America, there's different ideas about what are the racialized groups there and what is race and how racism manifests. So unless teachers are also comparing, which actually I think would be a great idea, for example, have students learn about how racism and race manifest in other countries, like in Latin America versus the US. That would be a great opportunity for high schoolers to do. But in terms of guiding students throughout their school years, we do have to have more of a conversation and more of a commitment from districts in order to have a scope and sequence for the students to learn about race. And bilingual education should integrate more ethnic studies into their programs.
And I definitely want to add from my own experience, I noticed that I didn't start learning more deeply about race until I got to college, and I know that is a reality for a lot of people. And I definitely think it could have impacted maybe the way I viewed myself and how I viewed my peers if I did have this education early on, when I was in elementary, throughout middle school. So yeah, I think what we're discussing right now is so important. And with that, I'm curious to know, what do you hope to see for the future of race and education in this country? I know we talked about some of the challenges that we're currently facing, and I know people are very concerned about, what's going to happen in the next 4 years and after, but what do you hope to see for the future in regards to this topic in education?
Thank you. I'm really hopeful because in my home state, California, we are thinking more closely about how to have ethnic studies in schools. So I'm hopeful that that brings me hope, and I hope other places in the U.S. also integrate ethnic studies more into their curriculum and their students' learning, and to recognize that we do we do need to, um, as a society, start thinking about how we're going to teach this and recognize that it may not always look or be great from the get-go. So one of the things that I think about is, for example, how we've all had teachers who, for example, math teachers who have not been the best teachers, right? Now, in terms of how we learn about how to teach about race, there may be some lessons that are not so great, but that doesn't mean not to teach about race at all. Just like we would not say not to teach math at all, just because some teachers are not very good or not. So instead of just eliminating or just thinking about like, oh, race is too complex, it's too controversial, we can't talk about it, that's really not what the best way to approach it if we ever want to then get better at it in terms of a society.
Now, can you just explain, or first tell us where people can go to find the book, where they can go to read it, but what do you hope, readers actually grasp after they're done interacting with the book?
Thank you. Sure. So the book can be found at Bookshop, at Barnes and Noble, at the Harvard Education Press website, and also in Amazon. And what I'm hoping that readers take away from reading the book is that bilingual education and schooling generally are are giving are teaching about race in implicit and explicit ways. So we need to think about how to support teachers in doing this in progressive ways and ways that develop students' critical racial consciousness.
Well, with that, I want to thank you so much for joining me and having this very important discussion. I know this is something, as I mentioned, I studied race quite a bit, in college, but what's so amazing is that there's always so much more to learn, especially beyond your own identity or how, you view things, and to constantly challenge what we're being taught. Because as you help prove to me, ideas are always changing, and, we're constantly learning new things. So with that, I want to thank you so much for joining us and kind of opening, just another portal to a discussion that we should have, especially in a place like here, New York City in the Bronx. So thank you.
Thank you so much. I loved our conversation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We've come to the end of our show today. We hope you enjoyed this week's discussion on the social justice forums. To rewatch this week's edition, you can catch the Recable cast right here on BronxNet.org. If you want to join the conversation and present your point of view, you can visit our social media at BronxNet TV. Join us next week as we continue to elevate the discussion and bring further awareness across the globe. I'm your host, Kibin. Take care.